everyone. Welcome back to Beyond Evolution, where we help you navigate AI's impact on humanity. I'm Jess, your co-host, here with Mario, and our mission at Beyond Evolution is to help you reclaim your agency and thrive in a tech-driven world so we can make the most of what AI is offering us without losing sight of what makes us human. Today, we're joined by someone whose work deeply intersects with AI and global humanitarian issues, Andrew Schroeder, VP of Humanitarian Innovation at Direct Relief. Andrew leads groundbreaking efforts to apply data science, AI, and GIS, which stands for Geographic Information Systems, mapping to disaster relief, global health, and humanitarian crises. His work shows us what it really looks like when AI is used for good, saving lives and strengthening resilience in communities worldwide. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So before we hop into learning more about Andrew and what he does with AI, we will turn it over to Mario and he'll do a mindful moment for us so that we can really ground in this conversation. Yeah, and get the ball rolling.
Thank you, Jess. Happy to be with you both. Thank you both for your time today. As you know, Jess, we like to kind of give just a minute to pause, to arrive, to breathe, and to remember our shared humanness amidst this crazy, chaotic world pulling us in every direction with new information coming out every single day. So, yeah, we like to give this gift to you, our guest, and to our listeners, the gift of presence. We do this before exploring our topic, just to fully arrive here together as host, guest, listener, so we can all kind of feel free to relax and settle in. And if you're driving, of course, and you can't join, just skip ahead about 3 minutes and meet us at the start of today's conversation. So yeah, feel free to just relax in your seat where you are, or if you're standing or walking or sitting in your car now maybe, and give a little stretch if you'd like. Stretch the neck out, the arms, stand up, and give a wiggle, whatever you need to do to kind of fully relax your body, just to be still for a few moments here. And the whole reason that we do this is really to arrive back to our true nature, which is so easy to forget, amidst all of the information and all the doing and striving to achieve. And we just give ourselves a few moments here to just be. So if you feel comfortable now where you're at, you can begin to close your eyes. And we'll start with a few deep breaths. We'll breathe deep breath in through the nose, hold at the top for a moment, and release through the mouth. And when we do this, we want to kind of envision just releasing any tension that we brought with us from today. And at your own pace, just continue this for 3, 4, 5 breaths in through the nose, holding at the top and releasing through the mouth, each time becoming deeper and deeper as you continue to relax more and more into the present. You continue to relax and arrive more presently in this moment. You can continue to feel the presence, the calmness, the compassion that is always here in each moment and so easy to get away from. Just continue to breathe at your own pace. We'll stay here for about another minute and I'll bring us out slowly. Okay, at your own pace, kind of move your fingers, toes, arms. Move your head from side to side if you need. Open your eyes at your own pace. Here we can get started with the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mario. All right. Find where we are. All right. So we will hop into the conversation. Andrew, again, thanks for joining us. First, we'll start off with just getting to understand you a little bit more. So you really spent your career in the intersection of data, technology, humanitarian response. Kind of what drew you to this work originally, and where did that lead you to?
Sure. So, yeah, like you said, I've worked in humanitarian aid and technology for quite a while. I mean, the main thing that I was interested in doing when I first started was to help. I think that's probably true of everyone who comes to work in humanitarian aid in one form or another. I came to work for Direct Relief quite some time ago, and there was a need for better data to inform how the organization thinks about where people are most in need of assistance, what that means in terms of all the contextual factors that influence crisis, and how we can understand the impact of what we do better. And it's evolved a lot since then into things that I never necessarily anticipated. So we find ourselves here at artificial intelligence as the sort of latest iteration of how to sort of boost our thinking on, where, how, and why people need help and what works and what doesn't. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I could go into, but that's the long and the short of it.
So you really kind of focused on understanding, looking at the data and really understanding like where this data is coming from, what can we do with the data, and like how can we get better data to help, humanity and help society in terms of what types of things. So we can go more into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, years ago it was, a kind of novel to see where health facilities were located. I think when I first started at Direct Relief was when Google Earth was just released, and it was unusual to see exactly where assistance would go. It was sort of known like, well, there's contacts of people and you can talk to them, and there's a lot of transactions taking place, but there hadn't really been a map of that landscape before. And once the map was created, people wanted to add more things to the map. So add the location of where storms occur. If we were one of the early kind of major responses that was defining for, people from the early 20s was the earthquake which occurred in Haiti in Port-au-Prince. And, this was one of these places where, it's not that there was no data, but the data was not really well situated to play a role in the response in the form that it was in at the moment that the earthquake happened. So we had to figure out where the health facilities were located by combining information from a lot of different organizations. So there was an effort through the UN to identify sort of which health facility locations exist. How do you kind of, because you can't provide aid if you can't find a place to distribute that aid to. And health facilities in our case, because Direct Relief works in the health sector, as are one of those places. And then that changes a lot as a result of what occurred in the earthquake. So things were damaged. There was, an effort to try to link together information about that damage so that you could classify that overall. There was the first moment when, we started to crowdsource information. So Twitter just really was in its very early days, would get SMS gateways set up and receive information about individual requests for help and then aggregate those into patterns. It was one of the early stages where aerial imagery and satellite imagery was being used, kind of on a broad basis for understanding, some of that damage pattern, change over time. You know, uh, we had to source information about disease occurrence. As subsequent to the earthquake, there was a major cholera outbreak. We responded to the cholera outbreak with access to vaccine, access to sanitation materials, access to clean water. And so all of those things have data streams that are associated with them and that will inform how people understand whether or not your assistance did any good. And so that template pattern for how to be able to link data sets together so that you would then use them for various elements of humanitarian response has been repeated and expanded many times over the subsequent years. So that's more or less right.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's really interesting to understand like what all goes into, humanitarian aid. And so if there's a disaster, like what information is truly needed to make sure we can help humanity out in the best way possible. So like even just understanding where those locations are to disperse, aid, health aid and like hospitals and stuff. That's so important to know. And if you don't have that data, there's not really a good way to understand how how we're going to help people out efficiently. So, very cool.
Yeah, I think it's important to be specific. So, yeah, to your point, like you need to know where things are and how they're affected and whether they're operational. And that makes a big difference in terms of whether people actually get aid.
Definitely. So, in terms of that, was there like a particular disaster or crisis that made you realize that using AI and data together could help change how we could respond?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know that there was like a specific threshold moment. And it's worth noting that AI means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when we talk about this today, I think people hear AI and they think open AI and large language models and chatbots that you can talk to. That's not always how we've thought about it. So for instance, like I mentioned, using satellite imagery and aerial imagery as part of the response to a crisis. So when we take pictures of a disaster area, we have to be able to classify the damage. We have to be able to identify the building footprint. We have to do all kinds of analysis of that image. That's called computer vision, and that's a form of artificial intelligence because it's a computer doing things that we would ordinarily associate with a human's intelligence. So, early on, I think in the story I was just telling you about Haiti, I mean, we were using AI as part of image classification and as ways to extract detail from what otherwise would be a really large and somewhat difficult to interpret at times, data set. Later, I think as we would sort of automate a lot of those processes and then create models that would look for inference about like how do I understand, the likelihood that someone would be in a disaster affected area given certain circumstances. So that's a machine learning model that is also a form of artificial intelligence. So we do that to project whether you're in a food security affected area or the likelihood that you're going to be, subject to certain kinds of crises over time. And that can be used for prioritization, for thinking about one area as more likely to be affected than another under certain kinds of circumstances. So that's like statistical modeling, and but because you have the ability to train the model on new information, that model can actually get more intelligent over time, more accurate, and that will allow for people to make better decisions about things like prioritization or classification. Later on, I think probably the chatbot moment, arrived in a couple of years ago when we started looking at, you know, how to take advantage of the ability to synthesize large amounts of text information that we get from the internet to understand what people are saying about the occurrence of different events and disasters. I don't know if you've ever gone to the Humanitarian Data Exchange, or Relief Web, which is operated by the United Nations, but there's a lot of things that get published about disasters. People like publish situation reports, the news publishes, there's news in local environments, there's information that comes through social media. People that are observers, different organizations will post in different platforms. Honestly, who's got time to read all of this? The machine has time to read all of this. So we can use the chatbot LLM form of AI to read a large amount of stuff that we wouldn't otherwise really have time to do, and then turn that into useful insight for people that are trying to figure out like what's happening here, what's most important, what are people saying about this particular kind of event. And that kind of disaster was probably during the Ukraine war, actually, was probably, the second year of the Ukraine war was when we started really doing a lot of that. The earthquake that occurred in Turkey and Syria, also was, one of these kind of turning points where we started doing more of that. I mean, this happens as a matter of course now, so I kind of lose track of the events. I probably realized that I shouldn't date my life according to major world catastrophes, but the but yeah, that's sort of like the current state of affairs.
Gotcha. No, that's very interesting. And I like that you distinguish between machine learning and chatbots, which are technically both AI and artificial intelligence, but how you use them in different ways. I think it's really interesting that you like determine the difference between them and utilized them in both ways. So, using machine learning to, take pictures of certain areas to make the machine that you're using smarter, while also using chatbots to kind of condense down information that is good to know, but really hard to read and have the time to read. So, yeah, very, very cool to learn about. Mario, do you have anything to add to that? Or Andrew, anything else to comment on?
No, I think it's really good that I'm not a tech person, as a host on this show, because I want to know what I want to kind of go back to the basics just to make sure that people that anyone can understand what you're doing and what you're working on. Like, what is, you've talked a lot about what you do, but like, I'm just curious more about foundations, like what is GSI? What tools do
GIS.
you guys actually use the most, And you said you get, data, you have data streams, you're synthesizing large amounts of data. Yeah, I'm just curious more about like the foundations of what you do for the average person to understand, like me, who's not a tech person.
Sure. So, well, GIS, maybe we go back to that as a foundational technology. I mean, it stands for Geographic Information Systems. It's been around for a long time. It's not a new technology. I mean, GIS was created in the 60s through the military as a way to combine maps with databases so that you could visualize things in space and organize those visualizations using data organized into a database, right? Columns and rows. So the idea there was that anything that occurs on the surface of the earth or above the surface of the earth, we can beyond the surface of the earth if you want to get there, is something which can be organized into like specific coordinates and places and can be analyzed according to how one place relates to another, right? So the foundational law of geography is that all things are connected to everything else, but some things are more connected to others because they're nearer. And so that's true of like the pattern of traffic in a city. So um, it has a pattern because of the relationships between the vehicles and the people that move through the city. It's true of disease. So when disease is passed back and forth between individuals or animals to humans or something else, the proximity relationship to that passage is important. That then leads you to a set of questions that can be turned into math so that you could calculate what those relationships are in various ways, right? So I want to know, literally what the average proximity of people in a space are. That could mean that they're more or less likely to transmit a virus. That's something that is calculable and that can be organized according to GIS. So to go from the foundational idea to AI is to say that, well, like I can do that. Like, I can think about that in any particular kind of analytical problem that you want to pose that, proximity relationship in. But then if I want to do that, say, for a huge amount of information, like, I often will use data from the Facebook platform that anonymized location information to understand the relationships between hundreds of thousands of people over the course of a number of days. And so where are the hot spots and cold spots where people have increased their presence or decreased their presence. And during a disaster, that becomes really important because we need to know whether people have evacuated from an area. So if a storm has hit and you want to know whether or not there's more people in a place than there should be because that actually might be a hazard to them, or we want to confirm that people have moved away from a hazardous area, that involves calculations across a huge number of data points. And so that can lead towards, the need to use other statistical models to be able to create inference from that. So I want to make sure that I'm learning something from the pattern, and we learn that from the math. The more you automate that into something which can predict whether or not something will occur, say, I don't have information about it, but I have information about the past, that becomes closer to artificial intelligence because you're asking it to say, take this data, train a model on the relationships that would cause people to move as a result of a disaster, and then we could anticipate whether or not that's likely to be true. So before it happens, we can provide some likelihood that something is about to occur. And that can be useful for disaster responders because then they can look at that situation and see, well, should I put more resources one place or another? Can I evaluate whether having put resources one place or another, did I put them in the right place? And what does that mean for my understanding of whether or not I'm actually affecting change in the area that I'm trying to respond to? There's a feedback loop that then, that feedback loop becomes like key to what we call training data in artificial intelligence. So you're retraining a model on whether or not things occurred or didn't occur according to the data sets that you were using to make certain kinds of inferences. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very, I feel like you just expanded my mind to more fully understand the work that you do. And I hope that our listeners kind of experience the same. That's incredibly interesting. I mean, you're using satellites to turn geographical data into numbers to analyze and predict. And that's very interesting to me. I'm curious, kind of to speed it up a little bit, how does AI, other than processing massive amounts of data very efficiently, how does it help us respond faster, would you say?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what you mean by it, but I think one of the things that I've seen that's been a benefit is this idea that we need to sort of use information in relationship to one another in order to get a clear idea of what is occurring, why it's occurring, and how people are likely to be affected. In most cases, the faster and more accurately we can do that, the more likely we are to actually send reasonable assistance to where it's needed. We need to learn from the history of what we have sent to various places. We need to connect that to epidemiology or like the analysis of disease patterns in an area. We need to connect it to demography, the pattern of who lives there and what are the characteristics of that population. We need to relate it to the things that are being written about that event. If we were to, kind of isolate any one of those things, any one of those analyses could take us a lot of time. We want to be able to achieve speed and accuracy with our analysis so that what we are able to provide is insight. And to do that at the pace that would be demanded of an emergency. So emergencies happen very fast. They happen sort of in predictable ways, but often in not exactly the way that you thought it was going to happen. And you have to be able to take what you do know and adapt that to new information, new situations. And I think as a thought partner and as a tool for integrating information and helping to extract patterns, AI is actually an incredibly useful tool. You have to be careful with it, though. I mean, like, you can be led astray by artificial intelligence pretty easily if you approach it naively. So I think it's very important to have people that know what they're looking at to evaluate the results of AI produced work, because AI, as we all know, again, there's lots of nuance to this, but just in general, tends to make stuff up. And so we don't actually want it to make stuff up under emergency conditions. So there's a system design problem that you can apply to that. Well, there's ways that we can get it to reference authoritative information before it references non-authoritative information. That is technical term for that is called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And it's like, I just want you to look at this stuff because I think it's more important, and reference that as the authoritative source. But you have to build that into the system. You have to actually deliberately design it. There's all kinds of ways that you can also take a model and give it specific training data that is going to be based on the history of the things that you want it to, preference and analyze. So that's a little more intensive, but it's something that can reduce the error rate. So we can design customized models that are specific to a problem we're trying to solve. That is actually different from the dominant pattern of development for the big AI companies. It's worth noting. So, like a big AI company like OpenAI is producing what they call general intelligence. So the idea being that, it's like a computer is a general computation engine, right? It doesn't matter whether, what it's computing numbers for, it's computing numbers for all kinds of things. The general intelligence piece would be the idea that, well, it's not just like trained in biology or in, basketball or in, Taylor Swift lyrics. It's useful for all of that. And so that's the general part that is produced by like huge amounts of data, like sort of sucked up from all over the internet. That general model can lead you astray if you have a expert problem that you want to solve. So that's why small models or specific intelligence can be more important than like scaled general intelligence like that. And I think in humanitarian circumstances where trust, where expertise in sort of particular domains, reliability becomes very important. I think that it's like important to differentiate what you're doing from this sort of general intelligence problem. Although general intelligence is valuable for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a lot of people they hear AI and they think of ChatGPT. That's because that's what most average people are using. That's what it is to them. And that was kind of going to be my next question. Like, what is the biggest difference between what people view AI as and what you are specifically using it for, for its role in disasters like hurricanes and wildfires? And you can feel free to add on, but it sounds like you're saying it's mostly how it's trained. Like you really need to, and it sounds like you guys are getting better and better at how you train your models, to not hallucinate, like, so, in an erroneous way.
Yeah, I think that we've gotten better at fact checking, we've gotten better at training, we've gotten better at authoritative data, reference data, and all of that is important. I mean, there's a recent book called AI as Normal Technology that I think is like actually valuable for this because it helps you to sort of think, well, this stuff is impressive, but we've been here before. The idea that I just mentioned before that a computer is general computation is structurally, as an idea, not that different from general intelligence and AI. And that's a normal technology that we have a normal pattern for, like training people how to use and understanding the risks and what it's going to do well and what it's not going to do well. And in computation you have a garbage in garbage out problem, right? A computer only knows what you tell it. AI is getting better at answering sort of fuzzy logic questions, sort of where you're not 100% crystal clear on the input, but you still actually want to get a useful output that's similar to how we often talk amongst ourselves, right? It's like, I want to find the restaurant that's kind of over that way that I might have seen 2 weeks ago. Like the computer is not going to know that, but AI actually kind of probably could figure that out. So that seems like something where then expanding the capacity of many people that work in humanitarian organizations to be working with a higher level of capacity to integrate information and to use that information to solve problems, to make them smarter, is probably the single most important general idea that I would think comes out of AI. Whether that's the ChatGPT pattern or sort of the specific small model I was talking about before, that you want to be able to have everyone that works for the organization or for one of the groups that we support be able to understand how floods work and what the history of an area is and how what the number of people affected might be. I think we can take that as a normal technology into a kind of education and capacity building process. And that is pretty exciting, actually, that you would have a lot more people be a lot smarter about things that are occurring that would be of relevance to responding to humanitarian problems.
Absolutely. It's a lot of very good information. Jess, do you have anything to add or any kind of follow up questions to any of that? I'm learning a lot here, but just want to give you a chance to chime
No,
in.
definitely. I think no, I think like what you were saying about, the general versus like specific, I think is really important because if we're trying to solve certain issues in the world or, not just humanitarian relief, but also like, work related issues or health related issues or, physical health or any of those sorts. Like you want a model that's trained specifically on data that's from coming from good sources and not just like used from a general or asking a general intelligence these questions that might not have the correct answer and they're just really, I believe what you were saying about rag, I think it's like the percentage, right? And like you're asking a question and it's going to retrieve the highest percentage answer and it's going to give you that back, right? So that's not exactly
Sort of. Yeah, it'll find, the answer that is most likely to be authoritative because you've told it what you consider to be authoritative information. And it won't sort of just go like, oh, let me go use this portion of my training data that came from Reddit feeds to answer my flood model. Like, nah, let's not listen.
right. So yeah, I just think it's important to like distinguish that, and especially like if our listeners, are looking to help out with some problems and like some world issues, it's these machines are like we need to distinguish between the two and not use one for the case of the other. So
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, one of the other advantages that small artificial intelligence models have is that they could run locally. So the hardware becomes interesting because most people in the world don't use, laptops and desktop computers. They use a mobile phone to access information. In emergency, they may or may not actually have access to the internet on that mobile phone. And the more kind of miniaturized you can make a model while still being valuable for all the things we were just talking about, uh, it's more likely to run on your phone. And that's like a important thing just from a technology standpoint, but it's also an important thing from a access question. More people that are in circumstances where they're facing crisis might be more able to use artificial intelligence if you can miniaturize it, run it locally, put it on a device that's much more likely to be in their hands. I think there's similarly, they can run at lower power. We have a lot of concerns right now about how much energy artificial intelligence on a general scale consumes. There are just metrics starting to be released now about electricity, water consumption, other things. There are ways to mitigate all of that, even for the general scale stuff, but it is a concern. And so the move towards smaller, more precise models for particular problems, actually, they use a lot less energy. That's one of the ways that they can run locally. So those kinds of things become important to consider when you think of like the physical nature of artificial intelligence, which is something which cuts against the grain of the popular image that there's just sort of amorphous thing out there that you can query that is trying to provide you with information and you can't see it or touch it. It's sort of in the network. Like that's not really true. It's a data center that exists in a time and place and it uses resources and land and electricity and all of that kind of stuff, and it's crunching statistics in order to provide you that. All of that is highly physical. So that physical nature needs to intersect with how you plan for the way that technology will work in a crisis.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's key to understand that it's not this like godlike being, right? And it's this practical technology that we're implementing and it has real world consequences and benefits as well, but real world. I guess
Yeah. I mean, it's
implementation.
not a being at all, really. It's
Right.
like that's like the normal technology part, right? Like, your laptop is not something that you usually think of as a being, and AI is not actually different from that in the level of like, how technology works. I mean, it feels different because it answers questions in a way that's more human-like, but it's not something that is actually different at the level of the thing itself.
Right. Yeah, and to note what you were saying before, like I think it was great that you pointed out like benefits of both, general intelligence and more specific intelligence, where like general intelligence might have more access to people in lower income, lower technologically advanced countries. So there's a benefit there in using general intelligence, whereas the specific intelligence, might be more environmentally friendly and not as like hugely disastrous, impactful on our environment. I think it's good to point
It
out
also it
all the
also doesn't require scale in order to be smart. So, like the basic premise of OpenAI, for instance, and like the best book on this is the new Karen Howe book, Empire of AI,
Mhm.
where she goes through really clearly like how the whole thing depends on this idea that you just scoop up everything from the internet, throw more compute at it, and eventually you'll produce digital God. And you're like, that's a weird idea.
Right.
Most of those things that we want AI to do can be solved in more specific, more trustworthy, and reliable ways if you move away from this sort of scale is everything paradigm into something that is focused on time, place, problems, that are bounded in some way. I mean, the most important factor that we have to consider just in general in disaster response and public health is probably trust of the people that we're working with. If AI is implemented in the wrong way, it has major risks to violate that trust because it can provide information that's not only mistaken, but potentially malicious or violating community standards. You really can't do that and expect to retain trust of communities. And if you lose that, you lose the whole ball game around provision of aid. So that's really important to think through.
Definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, we'll move on to the next section that we have. Um, Andrew, I know we talked last time about inequality and using AI in humanitarian aid like might make things worse off for more people. What is your kind of take on that? Like, could AI unintentionally make inequalities worse? Or, yeah, like, give some
I
background
mean,
on.
clearly in society as a whole, AI could make things worse for more people if you have the benefits that accrue from AI that are concentrated into the owners of the systems and the training data, which are very small. It's a very small number of people that make a large amount of profit off of AI models. There is a kind of inherent risk to this in terms of a kind of de-skilling function or moving the locus of intelligence out of people into the ownership of the model. There are ways to think about benefits that accrue from the existence of the models that would counteract some of that question around benefits accruing to concentrated ownership. You have to design for this. So this is a policy question more than a technology question that we have to be able to think about like equity when it comes to access to ownership and control of the models. Like if you're going to base your community on certain kinds of technologies, whether that's a water pipe or an AI model, it does seem like you ought to have a right at some point to have ownership and control at a relevant community level over those systems. And I don't know that AI is fundamentally different from other forms of infrastructure in that model. So as these become more tightly integrated, these systems, artificial intelligence systems, become more tightly integrated into the infrastructure that just runs life. Equity question becomes increasingly important, I think, and difficult to answer because the nature of the technology, as we were just describing on this general intelligence level, tends to preference scale, and scale requires heavy capital investment. You're building huge data centers and accumulating huge amounts of data that goes into the data centers, and you have to operate them 24/7, and you're paying the designers of algorithms, what is Zuckerberg paying these people now? Like $100 million a piece? They're very
Yeah.
expensive labor. So that kind of thing doesn't tend to lend itself towards community level control over models. But, I think that we have policy corollaries in other areas in terms of, community control over other essential resources that govern the lives of the communities. I mean, water is a good example, power is a good example, transport infrastructure is a good example, housing is a good example, and they're not fundamentally different in nature in terms of relative equity and control than artificial intelligence. I mean, you also could create like what we used to call this a digital divide, where there's some people that are really, really, really high access and high functionality when it comes to the use of certain technologies, and some people that may not have access and may have be way down the chain. AI, because it's gone so quickly into this chatbot mode, exists on the internet. A lot of people can access it. Google, for instance, has put a ton of resources to putting new language, like a large number of translated languages, into the models so that you can use it regardless of what language you speak. Those things do mitigate against it at the level of the use. But when it comes to actually, say, data centers in parts of Africa or in, low income countries around the world, you can name a number of them, their ownership is not going to be there, or at least we don't have great examples right now of where the distribution of that ownership is going to be relocated. And there's battles now over who gets to access the latest chip technology, and between China and the United States and parts of the Middle East, et cetera. I mean, these are grand strategy geopolitics that are playing out in the way that control over oil resources would play out. It's similarly designing certain kinds of inequities into systems. So that's really, I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I'm just a humanitarian aid worker. But the idea is not different. I think that we have to think about these in terms of global systems that produce different kinds of inequity.
Yeah, I agree. I think like going back to your first point, I think like we need to make sure that the human being in charge of these systems is going to spread the wealth, equally in terms of this technology. And so like that really goes back into making sure that the human being has these set principles in them or instilled in them that, they see these inequities and they notice them and they help, in different ways, I would say. And so like right now with the powerful communities and the powerful leaders who have, you know, access to this technologies, I think it's really important that we install or instill these policies. That way, communities that don't really have access to it are able to before it's too late and the inequality is, super extreme.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that it's it's important to remember that none of this is natural. So it just doesn't happen. It doesn't automatically fall out of the model, that it didn't automatically fall in the trail. If that's a choice that people made, and so they made that choice, they can make a different choice. And so helping people to make better choices is a properly functioning policy process. I would agree with what you're saying in terms of trying to kind of, if you want to see a more equitable outcome, you have to help design for that more equitable outcome.
Definitely.
What do you think that, like, obviously we don't know. There's so much of our reality that's just so unknown with, the unfolding of AI. But like, what do you think the chances are, or do you think the chances are pretty high that equity would that inequality would continue to increase
Increase.
from AI? Zuckerberg can throw $100 million at per person. You know,
Mm.
I am over here, working on a few startups with like, a few thousand, and it's even for me, and I feel pretty privileged, so to me it's like I think it's a no-brainer that it's only going to exacerbate inequalities in our economy. But I'm curious, like,
I
how likely you
Yeah.
think it is.
Well, you'd have to think about, like, I think you put your finger on like this ownership inequality. So that is not something that was created by AI, but it follows in the trail of other kinds of ownership inequalities that are persistent and growing in American society for sure, global society almost certainly, and which we have had a real struggle over how to design against. There have been a number of different ideas and attempts, and we are still in a growing inequality phase with few exceptions. There's other dimensions of potential inequality. So, I mean, the probably the most well-known of these is around labor replacement. So, if you are in a job that is automated in a way that, or could be automated in a way that could be done using what we were describing earlier around inference and training and the automation of that inference and training, well, that's going to be a potential issue because you may be individually subject to replacement by automated systems. We've seen early examples that that's already happening for entry level workers, for instance, that work in knowledge industries, people that write software code, people that write advertising copy, people that are, trying to get their foot in the door of various kinds of industries. That's become a problem. And on the other hand, it revalues certain kinds of jobs that are not maybe subject to the same kind of automation. So there is a potential where things that are much more physical are valued in new ways. So it's always a good job to be a plumber. They always make good money. So that is hard to automate. Like, that's a AI resistant job and might become even more so in the future. So I think there are countercurrents in all of these things. Like, there isn't one tendency that is like inevitable to occur. There's things that are mitigating against the worst outcomes, even as you have systems that produce growing trends towards inequality. Globally, I can tell you that like most people that I encounter in low and middle income countries are pretty excited about AI, to be quite honest with you. And they view it around a pattern that from like development economics is called leapfrogging. So like the model for this in like the classic example was like the introduction of mobile phones and digital currency into Kenya or into India, where because there was like for a whole bunch of reasons, phone of sort of wired phone lines and the electrical grid were not developed in a way that lent itself towards a lot of in-place infrastructure. Rather than like first put the wires in the ground and then go to mobile phones like the United States did, they were like, oh, screw that wires in the ground thing, I'm just going to use a mobile phone. And then that turned into, oh, well, actually now if I can like run some encryption on my phone and I can add an account, then I can use a service called M-Pesa. And so the Kenyan economy introduced digital payments transfer, well over a decade ago, and is only recently something that you start to catch up to in Western countries. When I go to India, I can pay for literally anything with a QR code. I can go to a roadside fruit stand and I can pay for an apple or an orange or whatever using a QR code. I can't do that in Germany. So that leapfrogging is then replicated in a lot of the interest in artificial intelligence to say, well, I can't afford a tutor for my child in such and such a subject, but through AI, I can automate a tutor for my child. And now I can maybe learn all kinds of things, or I could improve their performance in school that might not have been accessible to me before I could have that automated system. And your imagination can run away with you on the various scenarios where that could spin out and where people get excited about ways that this could be another leapfrog moment for low and middle income countries if we can get the access conditions right.
Right. Yeah, I hope so. And I feel like I kind of have to play devil's advocate to allow you to get to the whole point of this show, which is hope and empowering, our listeners and empowering the world. So appreciate you sharing that, and it makes me hopeful. And to know that even though there's this kind of big trend of inequality, there are many countercurrents, and I think it's still unknown how big the countercurrents are, but we'll find out pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think hope is always a very important thing to keep alive when you're dealing with crisis in particular. People come to work for me and they're like, I did not realize the world was this unstable, and we have to sort of, get their heads right again. And
How does
you get back into hope by realizing that things actually matter. What you do makes a difference. Yes, it's overwhelming to know that the world's very unstable, but also it's empowering to know that your actions actually influence that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna ask, like, how do you stay grounded? How do you stay hopeful working alongside disaster relief all the time? Do you have anything else?
Well, to some degree, exactly what I just said is that I have a reasonable confidence that at least some of the things I do actually make a difference to specific people. So, like I work for Direct Relief, which supports local healthcare programs all over the world, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, to the tune of millions and millions of people, some of whom I've met personally, and actually what the result of providing assistance is, the timely access to the right medication, or being able to put on an N95 mask in a fire when you otherwise might not have had access to that for whatever reason, that it was a shortage, or that just weren't in the right place at the right time. So those kinds of things, and the specific tangible results of actions that I know people undertook in collaboration with people and technology to make that outcome happen, that's hopeful, because you could hardly say that things don't matter, or that all is lost, when you see over and over again that that's not true, that what happens from your actions specifically does make a difference. Sometimes hard to scale. So, like, if you're saying, oh, well, then how did that change, like, the entire government of the United States? I don't know, actually. That's like a different problem. But the hopeful influence over access to resources in crisis is something that we have a lot of control over.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really helps to like know that you're making a difference and making a positive impact in people's lives from these disasters, like your work is directly impacting that and helping them. So that's
Yeah,
good.
it's so easy to feel so small in our world and among all the changes. I see all the updates with AI every day, and I'm just like, this thing's so big, and I feel so small. So I appreciate you bringing us back to our power.
Yeah, it's easy to feel small. It's easy to feel like, I mean, also is a problem with technical design of AI that it's a black box. Like, you can't see how it actually operates. Although there are some things that are starting to come about that mitigate that even a little bit. But that feeling as though it's happening, you don't know why or how, it's influencing all kinds of things about your life and people around you, and you're not going to own that company, you're not going to like build that algorithm, it can feel disempowering under the right circumstances or the wrong circumstances. But that also feeds into other things that you do have a lot more control over, and it's really important for people, I think, today more than any time in my lifetime, to recover the idea that life is not happening to you, you are doing it.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, that's why we're so big on agency in this podcast is like we have the responsibility and we have opportunity, to create and kind of maneuver our lives in a specific direction and AI in a specific direction. It's not just happening to us. We have that impact on it and we can make a change. All right, Mario, I'll
Not
keep
guaranteed to
letting you.
win, but you are guaranteed to actually do something.
Yes. As long as you put in the effort.
Yeah, totally.
So in this last section, we like to kind of look ahead, look down the road. We've talked a lot about the past, your past, where we are, where we might go. But I'm curious if you could kind of reimagine the future of humanitarian response with AI fully integrated, or in other words, like, you know, if you could see the best thing happening or the best outcome in your line of work, what would that be like in 50 years or 100 years?
Well, the best thing that would happen is that my line of work no longer exists because people have control over the systems that are required to respond to and to mitigate crisis. So, we invented humanitarian aid as the response to a shortfall in resources, a shortfall in information, a shortfall in you know the timing of how people experience certain kinds of events. And the it's really clear from everything that I've learned over the course of the last couple of decades that the more you put resources and control down towards the bottom of the pyramid, where people live and they're most likely to be badly affected, the better the results actually are. So uh, if communities, through having lots of access to information and artificially intelligent systems and ways to generate wealth in new ways and to equitably distribute that wealth in a way that makes it so that you have everyday systems that work well, that is where humanitarian aid would probably no longer be needed. And that is what we ultimately should strive for. Although I like my job and everything, but it ought to be a job that in the long run doesn't exist.
Right. Very surprising answer. Did not expect you to say that. But that your words really do make me feel hopeful. So I really appreciate your energy and just your awareness and how you share your message. So I really appreciate that. Along the lines of kind of continuing to empower our listeners, how do you think that everyday people, not just aid workers like yourself, can contribute to building an ecosystem where AI is used for humanitarian good?
Well, I generally think that the best thing that people can do is to build systems that work for everyday people now. So, like, when crisis is worst, when a hurricane is most likely to cause death, is when, to some degree, it's the scale of the emergency, but a lot of times it's that system that's weak. So when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, it caused thousands of deaths. Most of those deaths were when people could not get access to care after the storm, where they had diabetes and then they were disconnected from their insulin supply and their doctor, and then they went into acute shock and a number of them died, especially if they were older. Um, so what you can do now is to focus on where the systems are weak and what you can do to make them stronger. So that is something which we can do in terms of directing public investment. It's something we can do in terms of organizing communities to build better systems in communities. It's something that comes from making people more self-aware about the way that systems work, because sometimes things don't work not because people intend them to do that, but through inertia or just lack of understanding of why things worked a certain way at one point and need to continue on at a later point. So that, I think, sort of robust system development and repair at the base level, like when I was responding to the Ebola crisis in West Africa, afterwards we were like, what would have made the biggest difference? Functioning public health system. Access to modern medicine makes a big difference. And so what we should have done with all the funds that came in for the crisis is build a functioning public health system. For a lot of reasons that didn't happen, or it didn't happen in to the degree that it should have. And so that's something that we need to use whatever tools at our disposal, AI, other kinds of analysis, politics, what have you, to identify where those things are going wrong and intervene early to make them better, because we can build better health systems. We know how to put health clinics together. We know how to do rural electrification. We can put solar panels on and sort of extend data into rural areas, and that can then produce systems where people have control over the resources that will serve them in a crisis. But that requires like bottom up thinking. It requires like a lot of people to collaborate, and it requires actually approaching things both with an open mind and with evidence, with like looking at like actually how things work and then fix those things.
Right. Yeah, I can easily see why it's not an easy thing to do and why it's like, you know, there are weak systems. because it takes a lot of time and energy and effort and money. So I appreciate
Or
your.
there's pre-existing social, inequalities or discrepancies or hierarchies or however you want to describe it that make it so that, things were not done well for everyone or for the most people previously. You know, we could always have the ability to redirect that. You always have the ability to make a different choice or to build a better primary health system or to put roads there or things like that. And we need to figure out why that's not happening. Like, what are the factors? This is actually something that, if we could have more like reflective, acute policy analysis in parts of the world where we really need to like think through why some of these disinvestment dynamics are happening, that would be great. I think there's a lot of opportunity for changing how resources flow and making systems much better. That would be like the greatest contribution to humanitarian assistance because you might actually, again, not need it.
I'd love to be a part of that. That sounds fun.
Yeah, I think most people can do it too. Like this is, you don't have to know technology in order to do it. I meet people
Yeah.
that everyone I meet has some relevant skills that
It's
apply
just
to these
like
things.
brain power and understanding like correlations, right? And kind of, yeah, analysis.
And learning. I mean, this is another thing that's hopeful about artificial intelligence. I feel like although I'm very pro university, I work with academics a lot. I was myself an academic. I also feel like learning needs to be spread out over your entire life and not something that is confined to one moment. And artificial intelligent learning systems are making it easier to adapt your learning to different situations and to do it all the time forever. That's actually quite hopeful because everything that I was describing earlier, like I got to learn it in an afternoon, like that's going to, take some time and usually requires help and patience and people to explain things. And that's maybe in short supply. So artificial intelligence systems can help to make learning a much more generalized social function.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. That's you're always like one step ahead of kind of where I want to go next with the conversation. And I was just kind of thinking like, I really want to come down. You're such an inspiring and like empowering person, I think, for our listeners and just for the world. But I really want to bring it down to the individual and ask like, in this world of AI, what's one thing someone who feels distant from these bigger issues, bigger crises, like just anyone on the street could do today with AI to kind of feel like they can make more of a difference in their reality in the world around.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I think that, using it to understand the world around you, first of all, is a good thing to do. I like in keeping with what I was saying before about make systems better. If you're living in a neighborhood and you want to understand how that neighborhood works, often people don't even know where to look. Like how am I supposed to understand like how all of the things that have to go together in order to make life possible in this place work, like the water system and the buildings and the rules of various, often it takes someone to explain it to you or to you can question and answer. So I would encourage you to not treat the world as a black box. That one of the things that can be done with AI is to open up all those boxes that you might have thought were black boxes and to start looking at like everything has an explanation. Everything is connected to everything else. And so you can understand how all of the you can understand how your house works, you can understand how the bus system works, you can understand the healthcare. The Everyone is capable of various forms of learning. And so the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the more you feel as though you get something out of it, the more likely you're to do it again in the future. And the more you do it with other people, the less lonely you are and the less disassociated you are from feeling as though your actions have consequences. So, you just have to get in the habit of opening up the black box and understanding that, oh, change you just have to get used to the idea that your actions have consequences, that even changing small things can lead you towards interconnecting that change to something else. So, yeah, just practice.
You've heard it here. Use AI to open up the black box of life and learn. Makes me think of like, it makes me realize that it's kind of like YouTube University. Like that's what I always said when I, learned how to do tile and electric and drywall and all the stuff that I never knew how to do. I learned it on YouTube, and it's like AI is like YouTube University on steroids. It's
I mean,
really
in many ways,
lets you
especially if you could get you make sure that data is still good, the number of problems, I would totally agree with you. Like, I had a problem with the front steps on my house the other day, and I took a photo and uploaded it to Gemini, and it told me how to repair my steps and gave me instructions on how to do it, and then talked me through how to do. I'm like, I mean, I'm terrible at this, but I actually feel more competent now. Can be transported to all kinds of things, whether that's your steps or whether that's like, how to ensure that a package arrives at the right place at the right time, or how to know that some people are more vulnerable than others to certain kinds of risks, and that there are well-known ways of responding to those things that you can also participate in. And it's not just, you know, donating money. Like, that's the answer that we've gotten in the United States, I think. Although I work for a nonprofit, they do like you to donate money, but, you know, also getting involved in various kinds of activities that utilize your skills and put you in contact with others leads you towards feeling that broader sense that there's a process to all this, there's an outcome, and that it's not, you're not tithing by giving to nonprofits.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, you're good. Um, all right. I'll wrap it up then. So, Andrew, if you could leave one more, I guess, comment, one more insight, any advice for our listeners about how AI can best serve humanity, what would it be? What would you say?
Well, I'd say I would focus on the specific over the general. I would realize that none of this is magic. It's all just numbers, that you can learn any part of it, and that the technology that you're trying to understand also can help you to understand it. So ask good questions, follow them up, work in collaboration with other people, and just stay at it over the long term. And you can form productive human machine relationships that are often better than just yourself by yourself. So, we're tool users, and this is just another tool, and it can be very powerful under the right circumstances. So just keep at it.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great summary of everything we just covered. So, thank you for sharing that.
No
Um,
problem.
Mario, you want to go into your question and then I could wrap it up fully?
Yeah, we just like to give you a chance, before we go to just talk about any other projects you're working on, or, how where people can follow you or get in touch with you. If there's any way we can support you by kind of letting you talk about that, this is your time.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can always find Direct Relief at directrelief.org. I also co-direct this project at Harvard called Crisis Ready, which is at crisisready.io. I would encourage folks to check it out. They're available as social media platforms as well, just punching in the search terms. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's helpful to sort of have conversations like this to make sure that as many people as possible can feel like they have a role in the future. So if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. My information is available there. And
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us today on Beyond Evolution.
thanks, both of you.
Yeah, we learned a lot in this conversation, and I think it was really important. And you really summed it up very well on, understanding AI and the stuff that we went over today. That AI, is a tool for us to use, and I feel like it really brought us to a more grounded conversation about it instead of kind of looking at it in this godlike, stance. So I think that was very helpful in this conversation, and it was really interesting to learn about how AI is being used in your field of work, helping out with humanitarian relief and how it's, helping us react to these crises in a better and more efficient way. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. Thank you again for your time.
No worries. Thanks, both of you.
Awesome. So again, or not again, but to wrap it up, we always like to say, wow, this world of AI and what it means for humanity can be exciting yet uncertain. It's a journey of growth. So keep learning, keep evolving, but always allow yourself to just be. Thanks so much.
Cool. All right.